Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some big updates regarding the war between Russia and Ukraine, with Donald Trump saying the Ukraine minerals deal will happen soon. We know it was supposed to be signed at this point like three and a half weeks ago with Zelensky inside the White House. However, there was the big blow up. Zelensky ended up leaving. There was no minerals deal that was signed. I have maintained that I think for Ukraine, it's very advantageous that this deal gets done. On the surface, you could say, well, the US is screwing Ukraine. We're getting our money back. Whether or not you think that's right or not, whether or not you think we invested into a proxy war in a way to weaken an adversary like Russia, and that's where our money went. This is a very good thing for Trump to be able to get this back if it ends up happening. When you're talking about mineral extraction, especially in Ukraine, it's not particularly the easiest thing, and it also hitches the United States to the region, and that's why Ukraine likes it. Ukraine understands as we enter a potential negotiating period, and this in and of itself is a bit shady in terms of, is it a ceasefire? Well, no, not really. Is it a partial ceasefire, at least on energy and infrastructure? That's what they're trying to pound out right now. Trump on Wednesday had a 1 hour phone conversation with Putin and then a long phone conversation with Zelensky. They're still trying to work out exact details. Fighting continues on the front line as both of these countries joust to try and get the most amount of leverage before a ceasefire is agreed to. You could be looking at different sticking points when it comes to the agreement. I heard Zelensky yesterday say in a press conference that he wanted to go back to the 2014 borders, which is just not going to happen. And people are like, well, that means it's a forever war. It's going to keep going on. Well, no, that's just a negotiation. You don't say publicly, all right, we're going to give up everything. You say, no, we're going to stick to our guns. We haven't even started the negotiation. There's no ceasefire in place yet. The thing that Putin was saying was that I'm not going to agree to a ceasefire if I don't know how a peace deal is going to look. Because I would imagine Russia probably thinks they're in an advantageous spot right now in terms of forming offenses against Ukraine. They don't want to stymie their momentum. They just pushed Ukraine out of the Kursk region, which is it was a vital spot for Ukraine. It was the only area that Ukraine had in Russia. It was the first time Russia had been invaded on their homeland since World War II. But look at this. Trump says U.S. will sign the minerals deal. Peace talks, he says, are going, quote, pretty well. I mean, this is, it's an ebb and flow with these things. You're going to get, both of these countries are demanding certain things. You have the European NATO countries backing Ukraine and saying, I mean, remember Boris Johnson back in 2022, don't agree to this. They were going to sign a peace deal. That was the Istanbul talks. And he said, don't do it. Ukraine minerals deal seen as a repayment for the United States aid. EU leaders support Ukraine, but delay artillery funding decision. And it's just more of the same from the EU. It's all posturing. They don't want to actually escalate the war. I always hear things where people fearmonger and they say, well, the UK is getting ready for nukes and they're ready for World War III, but it's just not, especially at this point, realistic. When you're talking about Biden being in the White House, it was a lot more positive pro-war message for Ukraine fighting against Russia. You would think if you wanted escalation from the United States and the EU, there would be cooperation, and it would happen in 2023 with a Biden White House that was a lot more pro-Ukraine than Trump. Now you've got all these EU countries, specifically France and the UK, fighting against the United States in terms of should we support Ukraine, should we not. Technically, the United States right now does support Ukraine because when Ukraine initially agreed to that ceasefire, the U.S., it was in part, they were like, all right, we'll agree to the ceasefire, but we want assurances from the United States. We want the support. And so that goes along with this minerals deal. If the minerals deal happens, technically the United States will still be supporting Ukraine. It's mainly for negotiation, so Ukraine can say, well, we don't have to end this war if we don't want to. We're not going to get screwed. But Zelensky saying, oh, we want all this land back. We want the 2014 borders. That includes, I guess, Crimea as well, which is not going to happen. Them getting Crimea back, I don't think was ever going to happen. And them getting this Donbass region back, it's extremely unlikely as well. But you have that. You've also got this Ukraine attacking an airbase deep inside Russia. They're going back and forth with their attacks. They're escalating. You might say, well, that's a bad thing. But no, they know the peace is coming. I mean, this is it's a very tender thing. It's delicate. But the thought process is that we know peace is coming. So they're both ramping up their effort right at the end of this war. So when they go into that 30-day, if it ends up happening, the 30-day negotiating window, and I don't even know if that's going to be happening because the original ceasefire has turned into a potentially partial ceasefire. We don't even know if we have the partial ceasefire at this point. But apparently Trump said they agreed to it, and it's going to be happening. My guess, the next big thing that gets announced is this minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine, which puts into question what's going to be happening with the United States in the Donbass region if Russia annexes that land. Does the minerals deal with Russia still happen? Is it a 2-for-1? Does Trump want the United States to be tied to Eastern Europe for the foreseeable future? And what are the security assurances? Who decides to patrol the DMZ? These are all questions that need to be answered. They're all going to have to be ironed out. And we can see with what Zelensky is saying, they're going to posture and they're going to say, we don't want to give up any land. But that's not realistic based off of what Russia has given up to get that land. And could NATO drive Russia back? Yes, probably. But the issue is then it is escalation. And you're talking about escalation at the end of this war. And by the way, that's a European thing. And this is what Trump is saying. Trump is saying, listen, the reason, and I don't know if he wants to leave NATO truly, but the reason there's this ire when it comes to NATO is the difference, not only in terms of how the United States versus Europe views war in Europe, because obviously Europe is going to be a lot more scared of Russia than we are. It's just the dynamics of where the countries are located. But also politically, I mean, these countries in Europe are extremely liberal. The United States is a lot more conservative. We don't have the same beliefs that they do. The belief systems, the way our governments are, the way they operate, there's a lot that's different. So listen, if these European countries are very scared of Russia and they want to escalate themselves, the United States is not going to be involved in that. But I don't think it's going to come to that. I really don't. I think all of this support that France and the United Kingdom are showing Ukraine is all posturing to try and give them more leverage in a peace negotiation. The question is, what do those countries think of Ukraine giving up land? Because they have to know it's going to happen. They have to know it's going to happen. Two sides traded strikes overnight as Trump administration worked to hammer out details of partial ceasefire. And you can see the airstrikes happening. They're going back and forth. There's escalation because they know it's coming to the end. You've got Russian forces also carrying out further strikes on Ukraine overnight. We do have the map right here. You can see they say it's about 1/5, maybe 1/6 of Ukraine occupied by Russia. They're in the red. You do have the region, I believe it was this area over here, that at a certain point was controlled by Ukraine. They had advanced into Russia, the Kursk region, but it has since been taken back by the Russians. And they definitely wanted to do that because they didn't want to give Ukraine the negotiating leverage of saying, well, we'll give you this if you give us that. Well, you don't have that, so we don't have to really make any concessions. But it's really this region. Obviously, you've got Crimea and the Donbass regions here. And listen, this is what they want. And you've also got all of this. You can see people talking about, well, aren't all the minerals in the Donbass? Yes, the Donbass is very rich in certain minerals, but there's minerals all over Ukraine. You've got graphite, you've got magnesium, you've got rare earths. There's a lot of rare earths in a region right now that's controlled by Russia, but in general, there would be a lot of extraction all over central Ukraine if the United States did a minerals deal with Ukraine. So it's not just this area that has all the minerals. Yes, this is a mineral-rich area right here, the Donbass, that Russia potentially will get. And that's why Russia wants to do a deal with the United States to where we would probably extract minerals from this region. Obviously, if we do a deal with Ukraine, it would be all of these minerals that would be extracted in some form or another. Obviously, not all of them, but just that's what we'd be taking from. So, we will have to see what ends up happening in terms of this situation. But I think the next big step is that minerals deal. We're waiting on that domino to fall, and we're waiting on a potential partial ceasefire to even be agreed to. There's been rumors it's agreed to, it's not. But even if it is, it's a partial ceasefire. It's not even a full ceasefire. There's a lot of things that they're both trying to gain leverage here as we go into negotiations. And so there's going to be all this fighting right up at the end. And then hopefully there's negotiations, the peace deal happens. There is problems that are going to have to be ironed out, though. There are some serious problems. We know that NATO has said, all right, we admit Ukraine is not joining anytime soon. It's not going to happen, but there's going to have to be a formal agreement. I don't know if it's going to be indefinitely or 20 years or whatever it ends up being, but there's going to have to be an agreement that they're not going to join NATO, Ukraine, that is. And then also the big hangup could be Ukraine demilitarizing, which is something that I'm sure Russia wants. But Ukraine obviously is going to say, you're just going to reinvade us. Where are our security assurances from Europe? Where are our security assurances from the United States? Will Ukraine feel more comfortable doing something like scaling down their military if the United States is in the region? That could be a sticking point in terms of the military capacity that Ukraine is allowed to have. If that's a stipulation for Russia to end this war, that becomes an issue, because obviously they're going to want to have a legitimate military still, because they're not going to trust Russia. And so that becomes an issue. And we'll see if that ends up getting worked. I mean, these are things that are going to have to get worked out, but we know that was a sticking point in the 2022 talks. So this is just the current update. Is this also something? Military leaders discuss Ukraine peacekeeping force as partial ceasefire plans are worked out. So they're working out the partial ceasefire right now. And it's just going to come down to the United States having a minerals deal with Ukraine. Where does that put our minerals deal with Russia? Do we still want to do that? Does Russia still want to do that? Does Russia possibly want to form a relationship with the United States that's even bigger than an economic relationship? What are the European countries doing? How are they influencing Zelensky in terms of the demands that he's currently asking for? We know those European countries have got a lot of power when it comes to Ukraine. We saw it in 2022. There's influence there, and I think they're going to say, they don't want Russia to get any land. They're scared of Russia. They are. And that's fine. I mean, they're obviously a lot closer to Russia than the United States is, but it does create a situation to where the peace deal, it's going to be harder to do if they're really sticklers and they say, well, no, we don't want to give up any land. Well, you've already given up the land. The land is right now under government administration under Russia, because they invaded it and it's their land right now. So that land's going to be annexed. I mean, how are you going to get that land back outside of, I mean, I think the original goal was to sanction Russia to hell, and then it makes it just not worth it occupying this territory. But evidently that's not working. And so they just wanted to keep funding Ukraine until I guess Russia got tired and their economy tanked to the point where it wasn't worth it either. But at this point, I think it's pretty obvious that the problem with waiting is you're talking about more people dying, and you don't even know if that's going to work. It's going to weaken Ukraine to the point to where Russia may be able to get significantly more land, because at a certain point they're going to run out of troops, or they're going to run so low to the point where NATO troops are going to have to be involved, and then that's even more escalation, because then that's NATO troops directly engaging with the Russians, which I think that's something that Trump obviously wants to avoid, and that would be catastrophic if Ukraine ran out of troops, or it got to the point to where it was so dire that they needed more help, to where the Russians were advancing deep within Ukraine. I mean, if Russia really wanted a wide-scale invasion of Ukraine, they could take Ukraine. They're not doing that right now. And that's not to say Ukraine hasn't defended well. They have. Russia wanted to immediately take the capital and possibly take all of Ukraine like 2 or 3 weeks into the war. That's what it was looking like they were setting up with their offenses. But it didn't happen. And certainly NATO and the United States and all of the money and what we gave them certainly helped. Now they're starting to argue, because Trump says, well, we gave them $350 billion. And then Ukraine's like, no, think about this. All the EU countries. See, now they're trying to have like a match on who gave more money. They're like, no, it was only 80 billion. No, it was actually like 160 billion. Trump just rounds up. So he said it was 350, but it was like 180. It was like 180 billion. So Trump was close enough. And these European countries are like, oh, you only gave 84 billion. Look at it. What? No. The numbers are there. It's like 160, 180 billion dollars the United States gave. And we want like quadruple that. We're going to get like around $1 trillion back in minerals from Ukraine. And it's also protection. If we're in the area, it's going to counteract a Russian aggression, especially if we do a deal with Russia, to where now we're playing nicer with Russia. We're going to get back $1 trillion, $2 trillion in minerals from Ukraine. And that's with the investment cost of the mining infrastructure that needs to be installed in Ukraine to be able to do it, because Ukraine can't do it themselves. Ukraine just wants the U.S. in the area, and so I think they're more than happy doing this minerals. That's why Zelensky's like, I'm sorry, I apologize, let's just do the deal. That's what Zelensky said after he left the White House, and like the last few weeks he said that. So I still think the minerals deal is going to happen. They're probably just working out the details. How does the extraction process work? What is the U.S. involvement? Is the minerals deal separate from the peace deal? Does the United States have to commit some type of security to assure the minerals get extracted? But does that really matter if we're also playing nice with Russia? Because think about it. Well, I'm not going to go there, but just like, to be honest, I mean, if Russia does invade and we're already playing nice with Russia, they would probably still let us extract the minerals. I mean, if they invaded an area of Ukraine where we were extracting minerals from, I'm saying that. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that should happen. You know, I don't want Russia to invade anymore. I'm saying it's if you're nice with Russia, we're already probably going to do a minerals deal with Russia, although I don't know where that is. Putin said he wanted to do it. Putin understands playing nice with the United States is better for him. And so now you've got someone like Trump who is not a war hawk. He's not obsessed with NATO. He's not obsessed with Europe. And Trump really does want the peace to happen. So this is really how it's being facilitated. So the next domino, I think, you could talk about it being a partial ceasefire. It's a ceasefire on infrastructure, on energy. That's what they were saying. You cannot attack the infrastructure and the energy plants, things like that. But I guess there's still other fighting that's going to be happening. But this is all jousting for the peace deal. The problem is if this gets out of hand to where someone sends a missile where they're not supposed to, that could escalate things with all this fighting happening recently. But again, I think it's more so they're trying to put themselves in the best spot. It's just like last year in August of 2024, Ukraine invading the Kursk region, forcing Russia to have to send resources there. They held it until this past like 3 weeks ago. And Russia's like, no, when we negotiate with you, you're not going to have any of our land, because if you have our land, then we're going to have to potentially give something up to get that back. We don't want to give anything up to get that back in negotiations. We want to already have that back. And I believe they got it back fully, or at least like 90% of it back. So yeah, that's really what's going on right now. And it is kind of a mess because it's like, well, there was going to be a ceasefire. It was going to be worked out. You do a ceasefire, you do a 30-day negotiation, you do the peace deal. Well, now it's potentially, after all these phone conversations, a partial ceasefire on certain things where there's still going to be fighting happening. And then maybe there's negotiations happening in Saudi Arabia. Because originally they got Zelensky to agree to a ceasefire. That was the U.S. They were going to start sharing, and they did. They started sharing intelligence reports with Ukraine. Ukraine agrees to it. And then Putin says, I'll agree to it, but I have to talk to Trump first. And because he doesn't want to agree to something to where, okay, we're going to agree to a ceasefire, but if the peace deal, if we're so far off in terms of demands for the peace deal, there's no point in doing a ceasefire, especially for Russia. Again, I don't know their military situation exactly, but you would think if you're Putin and you have advantageous areas right now and you've got momentum in this war that's just kind of restarted here towards the end. Again, this is just all, I think, because they want to get leverage. You would say, well, we don't want a total ceasefire until we know we're in advantageous spots right now. I'm not going to agree to a ceasefire until I know exactly how the peace deal is going to be formatted, because otherwise we're just slowing our military. We're just slowing our military when we don't have to. We have the leverage right now. That's probably what Russia is saying. And Russia does have the leverage now. Yes, Russia could lose the leverage like that if NATO joined, but then that's escalation. But that was always something that was going to happen. They're trying to isolate this to an Eastern European conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the annexed area. It ends, and the liberal point is, well, it's just going to restart. There's always going to be problems. Well, you can't foresee that into the future, and Trump can minimize the chance of it restarting if he has a good relationship with Putin, which he does. And then they just accuse him because it's like Trump's this complete peace president. It is like they're saying Nobel Peace Prize, it's all going to happen. And so they're trying to minimize that by saying, well, that's when they started the whole Russian agent thing. Because remember, they said in 2015, Trump is a warmonger. He's going to go to war with Putin. It's disgusting. They realized he gets along with Putin, so they started changing it and flipping it. And they said, well, no, he's actually Putin's bitch, and Putin controls him. And Putin got him into office, and then they did the whole obsession with the Russian hoax and all of the money, the millions of dollars that were spent on that, the fake Steele dossier. But let's just get back to this. All of this is going to be mining potential for the United States. I mean, this is iron, graphite, lithium, magnesium, rare earths, titanium, uranium. And then yes, this is a mineral rich area right here that the United States also might. This is going to be Russian annexed territory. There's no way it's going to go back. Obviously Crimea, but this is also very likely going to be Russian annexed territory. Like zoom out, they're only getting that much. It's like 1/6. It's like 1/6 of Ukraine. And people say, well, it's just, this is a first and it's appeasement. Well, no, they've lost so much. They've barely gained anything. How is that appeasement? Look at that. That's what they're gaining, really? Look, I'm not saying it's good there's territorial gains when you're talking about war situations with an adversary like Russia, but we also look at Russia's GDP. They're a lot weaker than NATO wants you to believe, the European NATO countries, that is. So that's just the situation. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.